The dust made Elena sneeze for the third time in 5 minutes. She wiped her nose and stared at the sealed door in front of her. 2 years. 2 years of paperwork, committee meetings, and polite rejections from aliens who smiled with too many teeth. 2 years of being told that the human artifacts inside this vault were not important enough for her research grant, not significant enough for her time, not worth the trouble of opening old locks and disturbing old dust. But Elena had been patient. She had filled out every form twice. She had attended every meeting with a smile. She had nodded when Professor Talvin, the head of ancient studies at the Grand Scholarium, had patted her shoulder with one of his 6 arms and said that perhaps she should focus on more recent human history instead, the kind that showed humans as grateful newcomers to galactic civilization, the kind that did not ask uncomfortable questions. Now the door was opening. The mechanism groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Elena stepped inside and coughed as more dust swirled around her. The lights flickered on automatically, revealing rows of shelves stretching into shadows. Clay tablets sat in careful rows. Stone fragments rested in protective cases. Metal plates hung on walls behind transparent barriers. All of them came from Earth. All of them were thousands of years old. All of them had been sitting here, ignored while alien scholars studied more interesting civilizations. Elena pulled out her scanner and approached the first shelf. The tablet in front of her was brown clay, covered in wedge-shaped marks. Cuneiform, Mesopotamian, maybe 4,000 years old. She ran the scanner over it and waited for the translation software to process the symbols. The screen flickered. Then it displayed a single word, decorative. She frowned and tried again. The scanner hummed. The screen showed the same result. Decorative patterns, religious iconography. No linguistic content detected. Elena knew that was wrong. She had studied ancient languages before joining the Scholarium. These were not decorations. These were words. These were numbers. These were calculations that had taken brilliant minds years to complete, carved into clay so they would last forever. She moved to the next tablet, then the next. Each time, the scanner gave her the same meaningless results. Decorative, religious, primitive art. The galactic translation protocols were not even trying to read the symbols as language. They had decided long ago that ancient humans had nothing important to say, and so they simply stopped listening. Elena heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Professor Talvin entering the vault. His 6 arms folded across his chest in a way that meant disapproval. His face, which looked something like a dolphin's if dolphins had lived on land and evolved for another 1,000,000 years, showed what might have been amusement. Or pity. Elena could never quite tell. "Dr. Wright," he said. His voice was smooth and kind, the way someone might speak to a child who had just announced they wanted to visit the sun. "I hope you are finding what you need. Though I must tell you, many researchers have examined these artifacts before. They found very little of interest. Your ancestors were very spiritual people, of course. They created many beautiful symbols for their rituals. But mathematics, science? I think you may be disappointed." Elena held up the tablet she was holding. "Professor, this is a mathematical text. These symbols represent numbers, calculations. This particular tablet is computing the area of a field using a formula that would not look out of place in a modern textbook." Talvin's face did something complicated. "Dr. Wright, with respect, the translation protocols have analyzed these artifacts extensively. If there were mathematical content, the systems would have detected it. What you are seeing as numbers are most likely ritualistic counting. 1 God, 2 offerings, 3 prayers. That sort of thing. Simple enumeration is not the same as mathematics. Then why do these simple enumerations calculate pi to 5 decimal places?" Elena asked. She pointed at a series of symbols on the tablet. "This is not counting offerings. This is geometry. Advanced geometry." Talvin unfolded one arm and waved it dismissively. "Perhaps you are seeing patterns that are not there. Humans are very good at that, I am told. Finding faces in clouds, seeing purpose in randomness. It is a charming trait, but not very scientific." He turned toward the door. "I will leave you to your work. But please do try to keep an open mind. Not everything your ancestors created needs to be profound. Sometimes primitive people simply made marks on clay because they liked how it looked." He left. Elena waited until his footsteps faded completely. Then she pulled out her personal tablet, the one that did not connect to the Scholarium's network. She had spent 6 months building her own translation software. It was crude compared to the galactic systems, but it had one advantage. It did not assume humans were stupid. She scanned the tablet again. Her software processed the symbols. Text appeared on the screen, not decorations, not prayers, mathematics, pure mathematics. Equations that tracked the movement of Venus across the sky over a 19-year cycle. Predictions of lunar eclipses accurate to the day. Calculations of land area, irrigation volumes, grain storage, and tax assessments. Alina moved faster now, scanning tablet after tablet. Egyptian hieroglyphs that showed fractional calculations using unit fractions. Chinese oracle bones that recorded astronomical observations. Greek pottery fragments covered in geometric proofs. Every culture, every civilization, every corner of ancient Earth. All of them doing mathematics that the galaxy had declared meaningless. She found a stone tablet near the back of the vault. It was larger than the others, covered in symbols she recognized as Babylonian. Her scanner processed it slowly. The results made her sit down hard on the dusty floor. The tablet was calculating planetary movements, not just Earth's movement. The movements of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. The calculations predicted where those planets would appear in the sky 6 months in advance. The margin of error was less than 1 degree. This was not primitive. This was not decorative. This was astronomy. This was physics. This was proof that humans had been reaching for the stars long before they had rockets to carry them there. They had used nothing but their minds, their mathematics, and their stubborn refusal to accept that the universe was beyond their understanding. Alina looked around the vault. Hundreds of artifacts, thousands of symbols, an entire civilization's worth of knowledge, dismissed as meaningless by people who had never bothered to truly look. She thought about all the times she had been patted on the head by alien professors, all the times she had been told that humanity's real history began when the galaxy found them and lifted them up from their primitive world. But what if that story was wrong? What if humanity had not been primitive at all? What if they had simply been expressing their brilliance in ways the galaxy had never learned to recognize? She picked up the stone tablet and held it carefully. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, a human being had sat in the heat of ancient Babylon and watched the sky. They had seen Mars moving among the stars. They had wondered where it would go next. And then, using nothing but clay and mathematics, they had figured it out. They had predicted the future by understanding the present. They had touched infinity with finite tools. You were not primitive, Alina whispered to the tablet. You were already reaching for the stars. Her scanner beeped. She looked at the screen. The tablet had more calculations, more predictions, and at the bottom, a single line of text that her software had finally translated. It said, "So that those who come after will know we understood the heavens." They had not been making decorations. They had been leaving messages. Messages for the future. Messages for humanity. Messages that said we were here, we were brilliant, and we understood the universe even when we had to calculate it by hand. Alina stood up. The dust did not bother her anymore. She had work to do. She had 2 years of rejection to overturn. She had a galaxy full of assumptions to challenge. And she had proof sitting in rows on dusty shelves that humanity's story was far older and far greater than anyone had been willing to admit. The symbols were not meaningless. They never had been. It was time to teach the galaxy how to read them properly. Rin's office smelled like ozone and old books, which was impressive considering Rin's species did not actually breathe. The crystalline being sat behind a desk that looked too small for them, their faceted body catching light from 3 different sources and splitting it into rainbows across the walls. They looked up when Alina knocked, and their core pulsed with what might have been surprise or curiosity. Alina had been working at the Scholarium for 2 years and still could not always tell the difference. "Dr. Wright," Rin said, their voice emanating from somewhere inside their crystalline structure, like music from a glass instrument. "This is unexpected. I thought you were researching in the artifact vault. Did Professor Talvin throw you out already? He has been complaining about your presence in the faculty lounge." Alina closed the door behind her and sat down without being invited. She pulled out her personal tablet and set it on the desk. "I need your help. I found something in the vault. Something important. But I need someone who understands how the galactic translation protocols work. Someone who can tell me if what I am seeing is a mistake or something more." Rin leaned forward. Light danced across their surfaces as they moved. I work in computational linguistics. I help maintain the translation systems. If you found an error in translation, I should report it through proper channels. There are forms for this, committees. I do not want to fill out forms, Elena said. I want to know the truth. Why do the translation protocols call ancient human mathematics decorative patterns? Why do they refuse to recognize numbers as numbers? Rin went very still. For a being made of crystal, stillness had weight. Dr. Wright, the protocols were created by the finest linguistic minds in the galaxy. They analyze thousands of languages, millions of texts. If they classify something as decorative, there are reasons. Good reasons. Tested reasons. Elena turned her tablet around so Rin could see the screen. She had loaded images of the tablets from the vault, along with her own translations. Then explain this. Here is a Babylonian tablet calculating pi. Here is an Egyptian papyrus using fractions to divide grain. Here is Chinese bamboo showing binary concepts. The galaxy says these are religious decorations. I say they are mathematics. Who is right? Rin extended a limb that might have been an arm and touched the tablet. Their core pulsed faster as they scrolled through the images. They were silent for a long time. When they finally spoke, their voice had changed. It sounded smaller, uncertain. Where did you get these translations? I made my own software. Basic pattern recognition. Simple symbolic logic. Nothing fancy. I just told it to look for mathematical relationships instead of assuming the symbols were alphabetic. And it found mathematics. It found mathematics everywhere. Rin sat back. Light scattered across the walls like broken glass. The protocols assumed symbols were alphabetic. That is the foundation of the system. Languages are words. Words are made of letters. Letters represent sounds. That is how communication works for most species. We speak, we write what we speak, we read what we wrote. But if a species used symbols to represent concepts instead of sounds, if they used notation instead of alphabet, then the protocols would miss it. They would try to find sounds where there were none. They would call it meaningless because they were asking the wrong questions. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long has this been happening? How many human texts have been mistranslated? Rin touched the tablet again. They pulled up files from the Scholarium's central database. Archive records, translation logs, error reports that had been marked as resolved and forgotten. I need to check something. Give me a moment. Their core pulsed rapidly as they worked, pulling data streams that Elena could not follow. The office filled with soft humming sounds like wind chimes in a breeze. Finally, Rin stopped. The humming ceased. Dr. Wright, I think you should sit down. I am already sitting down. Then hold on to something. This is bad. Rin turned the display so Elena could see. The screen showed a timeline. Dates and decisions. Protocol updates and policy changes. When humanity joined the Galactic Assembly 300 years ago, your species provided samples of your languages for translation database. Modern languages. English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. Languages that use alphabets or syllabaries. The protocols learned those languages easily. Perfect translation. No problems. But ancient languages were different. Ancient languages were not even examined, Rin said quietly. There was an assumption, documented here in the policy files, that primitive human languages would be simple, crude, not worth deep analysis. So when artifacts came to the Scholarium, the protocols tried to analyze them using the same rules as modern languages, alphabetic rules, sound-based rules. And when the symbols did not fit those rules, the system defaulted to its fallback classification, decorative patterns, religious iconography, art. Elena stared at the screen. 300 years. 300 years of human history, locked away and labeled as meaningless because nobody had bothered to look properly. Who made that assumption? Who decided ancient human languages were not worth studying? Rin pulled up another file. A committee report from 3 centuries ago. The names were listed at the bottom. Professor Talvin's name was third on the list. The same people who run the Scholarium now. The same people who have been telling you that your research is not important. They knew, Elena said. They knew the translations were wrong and they did nothing. I do not think they knew, Rin said carefully. I think they assumed, and then they never checked their assumptions. That is worse in some ways. If they knew and lied, that would be a choice. But if they assumed and never questioned, that means they did not think your species was worth the effort of verification. Elena stood up and walked to the window. Outside, students from a dozen species walked through the Scholarium's gardens. They laughed and studied and argued about theories. They came here to learn truth. But truth required asking the right questions, and nobody had bothered to ask the right questions about humanity. "Show me everything," she said. "Every mistranslation. Every artifact. Every piece of human history that was dismissed as meaningless. I want to see all of it," Rin hesitated. "Dr. Wright, this could be dangerous. If we prove the protocols were fundamentally flawed, it calls into question centuries of scholarship. People have built careers on the idea that ancient humans were primitive. If we show that ancient humans were actually doing advanced mathematics, advanced astronomy, advanced engineering, then we are saying those scholars were wrong, that the galaxy was wrong, that we have been condescending to humanity for 300 years based on a translation error." "Yes," Elena said. "That is exactly what I am saying. Are you going to help me prove it? Or are you going to fill out a form and hope someone else solves the problem?" Rin's core pulsed in a pattern Elena had never seen before. Fast, then slow, then fast again. Like a heartbeat that could not decide its rhythm. "My career will be destroyed. Professor Talvin will see to that. I will be accused of bias, of helping a human researcher falsify data to glorify her species. I will lose my position, my reputation, everything I have worked for." "Yes," Elena said. "Probably. But you will know the truth. Does that matter to you?" Rin stood up. Light filled the room as they moved. "My species values truth above all else. We are crystalline because we believe in clarity, transparency. What is real should not be hidden. What is true should not be obscured." They walked to the door and locked it. Then they returned to the desk and pulled up another screen. "I will help you, but we do this carefully. We document everything. We verify every translation 3 times. We build a case so strong that not even Professor Talvin can dismiss it. And we do not go through the Scholarium systems. Everything we find we keep offline. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elena said. "Where do we start?" "We start with the oldest human mathematical texts we can find. We translate them properly. We compare them to the mathematical knowledge of other species at similar technological levels. We show that ancient humans were not just counting offerings to gods. They were calculating reality itself. They worked through the night." Elena provided images from the vault. Rin rewrote translation algorithms on the fly, teaching the software to recognize mathematical notation instead of alphabets. The results appeared on the screen one after another. Babylonian astronomy that predicted celestial movements years in advance. Egyptian engineering calculations for pyramid construction that accounted for structural load and stone weight. Ancient Indian texts that described zero as a concept, infinity as a mathematical reality, and irrational numbers as natural truths. "This is impossible," Rin whispered at one point. "This tablet here, this is calculating square roots using an iterative method. That method was supposedly invented by my species 4,000 years ago. But this human tablet predates my species' invention by 1,000 years. Maybe your species learned it from humans," Elena suggested. Rin went very still again. "The Accord? There are legends. Stories from before the Galactic Assembly. A civilization that traveled the stars and shared knowledge with promising species. Most scholars think it is mythology. But if the Accord was real, and if they visited Earth, and if they taught humans mathematics, then humans did not invent this alone," Elena finished. "But they preserved it. They carved it in stone and clay. They made sure it would survive even if everything else was lost. That takes intelligence. That takes foresight. That takes a civilization that knew knowledge was precious." Rin pulled up one final file, a star chart from an ancient Chinese text. The software processed it. The chart showed positions of stars, movements of planets, and coordinates to locations in space. Specific locations. Locations that were not near Earth. "Dr. Wright, this chart is navigational. Ancient humans were calculating routes to other star systems. Why would they do that unless they knew those systems existed? Unless someone had told them?" Elena looked at the coordinates. One system stood out. It was marked in the human chart with special symbols. Symbols that her software translated as, "where knowledge sleeps." She checked the modern galactic charts. The system was listed as unexplored, restricted, no reason given. Just a note that said authorized access only. "What if humanity already made first contact?" Elena said quietly. "What if we met the Accord 5,000 years ago, learned from them, and then they disappeared? What if we have been waiting all this time to go back? Rin's core pulsed rapidly. Then the galaxy has been keeping you from your heritage, and Professor Talvin knows it. The ancient pyramid had been scanned 1,000 times by 1,000 researchers, and every single one of them had concluded it was nothing more than a tomb. A very large, very expensive tomb built by a civilization that valued their dead kings. Elena stood in the virtual reconstruction chamber and rotated the model with her hand, watching the Great Pyramid of Giza spin slowly in the air in front of her. Rin stood beside her, their crystalline form reflecting the holographic light into patterns across the floor. Everyone sees a tomb, Elena said. But what if they were looking at it wrong? What if the pyramid is not about what is inside it, but about what it represents? Rin reached out and touched the hologram. Numbers appeared in the air, dimensions, angles, ratios. The proportions are mathematically interesting. The ratio of the perimeter to the height approximates 2 pi. The ratio of the height to half the base approximates the golden ratio. But these could be coincidences. Humans were very good at building things. Perhaps they simply built something that happened to have pleasant proportions. Or perhaps they encoded information in the structure itself, Elena said. She pulled up another file. The base perimeter, if you multiply it by specific constants, gives you Earth's circumference at the equator. The height multiplied by other constants gives you the distance from Earth to the Sun. The angles of the shafts inside point to specific stars: Orion, Sirius, stars that were important to ancient Egyptian religion, or stars that were important for navigation. Navigation to where? Ancient Egyptians did not have spacecraft. No, but maybe someone they met did. Elena expanded the hologram. The pyramid grew larger, filling the chamber. Every measurement, every angle, every shaft and passage, they all encode something: astronomical data, geographical data, mathematical constants. It is not a tomb. It is a library. A library built in stone so it would last forever. Rin pulled up their own files. The Mayan pyramids also have mathematical properties. The number of steps, the angles of the slopes, the orientations. They align with solar events, equinoxes, solstices, planetary movements, and their calendar system predicted celestial mechanics with accuracy matching modern computers. For a civilization without telescopes, that seems impossible. Unless someone taught them what to look for, Elena said. She closed the pyramid hologram and opened another. This one showed the Nazca lines, enormous drawings carved into the Peruvian desert. A hummingbird, spider, a monkey, and lines. Hundreds of straight lines that crossed the desert floor in perfect geometry. For years, people argued about what these were. Art, religious symbols, landing strips for ancient astronauts? But what if they are something simpler? What if they are a coordinate system? She overlaid a star chart on the Nazca lines. The lines matched. Not perfectly, but close enough. The long straight lines pointed to specific celestial coordinates. The same coordinates she and Rin had found in the ancient Chinese star charts. The same coordinates that were marked as restricted in modern galactic databases. That cannot be coincidence, Rin said quietly. 2 civilizations on opposite sides of your planet, both pointing to the same location in space. Elena pulled up more images. Stonehenge, the ancient stone circle in England. The arrangement of stones aligned with solar and lunar events, but also with sightlines to specific stars. Stars in the same region of space as the coordinates from the Chinese charts and the Nazca lines. She added more. The Angkor Wat temple complex in Cambodia, with its towers arranged to mirror the constellation Draco. The Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland, aligned to the winter solstice but also to stars in that same region of restricted space. They all point the same way, Elena said. Every ancient culture that built lasting monuments, Egyptian pyramids, Mayan temples, Nazca lines, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat, Newgrange, dozens of others, they all encode the same information. They all point to the same place. A place that the Galactic Assembly does not want anyone to visit. Rin examined the data carefully. Their core pulsed slowly, the way it did when they were thinking deeply. This would require coordination. Communication between civilizations that supposedly never contacted each other. How would ancient Egyptians know what ancient Chinese astronomers were calculating? How would Mayans in Central America know what builders in England were encoding in stone? Maybe they did not need to communicate with each other, Elena said. Maybe they were all receiving the same information from the same source. The Accord, teaching each civilization the same mathematical truths, the same astronomical data, the same coordinates, making sure the knowledge would be preserved in multiple locations in multiple forms, so that even if some of it was lost, some would remain. But why? Rin asked. Why go to such effort? Why teach primitive humans advanced astronomy and then leave? Elena thought about that. She walked around the holographic displays looking at pyramids and stone circles and desert lines, all of them reaching toward the sky, all of them built by people who should not have known what they knew. Maybe the Accord knew they were going to disappear. Maybe they knew something was coming, something that would destroy them. So they seeded knowledge throughout the galaxy. They found species that had potential and gave them information encoded in ways that would last. Mathematics carved in stone, astronomy built into architecture, a map to find them, preserved in monuments that would stand for thousands of years. And humanity preserved it better than anyone else, Rin said. You did not just remember the mathematics. You built it. You carved it into the largest structures you could create. You made it part of your culture, your religion, your identity. The galaxy thinks humans built pyramids because you valued dead kings, but maybe you built them because someone taught you that knowledge must be preserved at any cost. Elena pulled up the restricted coordinates again. She plotted them on a three-dimensional star chart. The location was 67 light-years from Earth, far enough that ancient humans could never reach it, close enough that a species with faster-than-light travel could visit easily. We need to go there. We need to see what is at those coordinates. If there is nothing, then we are wrong and ancient humans were just very good at coincidence. But if there is something, if there is evidence of the Accord, then everything changes. The Assembly will not allow it, Rin said. Those coordinates are restricted. They will say we are violating protected space. They will arrest us or worse. Then we do not ask permission. Elena closed the holograms. We find a ship. We find a pilot. We go to those coordinates and we see what is there. And if the Assembly tries to stop us, we ask them why. Why restrict empty space? Why forbid exploration of a system with nothing in it? What are they protecting? Rin was silent for a long moment. Finally, they said, I know someone. A human pilot, former military. They run private expeditions for researchers who need to visit places the Assembly would rather keep hidden. Expensive but discreet. If we are going to do this, we need someone who will not ask too many questions about why we want to visit forbidden space. Set up a meeting, Elena said. We have enough evidence to prove ancient humans were doing advanced mathematics. We have enough evidence to prove they were receiving information from someone. Now we need proof of who that someone was. 3 days later, Elena met Captain Davis in a bar near the spaceport. The bar was the kind of place where species from across the galaxy gathered to make deals that were not quite legal, but not quite illegal either. Davis sat in a corner booth that was designed for someone much smaller, their bulk making the furniture look like toys. They had the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in space and bore the scars to prove it. Dr. Wright, Davis said without preamble. Rin says you want to visit restricted space. Says you are willing to pay my rates. Says you need this done quietly. Want to tell me why a Scholarium researcher needs to break assembly law? Elena sat down across from them. I found something. Evidence that ancient humans had contact with an advanced civilization. Evidence that points to a specific location. That location is marked as restricted by the Assembly with no explanation. I want to know what is there. Davis studied her for a long moment. Then they laughed. It was not a kind sound. You think you found proof of ancient aliens teaching primitive humans to build pyramids, and you think the Assembly is hiding the evidence. Dr. Wright, do you have any idea how often I hear stories like that? Every other month someone comes to me with proof of ancient conspiracies. It is never true. It is always desperation and wishful thinking. Then why are the coordinates restricted? Elena asked. Why forbid access to empty space? Could be a dozen reasons. Dangerous stellar phenomena. Protected archaeological sites, military testing zones. Just because something is restricted does not mean it is a conspiracy. Elena pulled out her tablet. She showed Davis the star charts, the mathematical calculations, the alignments from pyramids and stone circles, the way every piece of evidence pointed to the same location. Davis's expression changed as they looked through the data. The cynicism faded. Something else took its place, interest, maybe even belief. This is real, Davis said finally. You actually found something. I found enough to make me want to look, Elena said. Will you take us? Davis set down the tablet. My ship, my rules. If the Assembly sends warships, we run. No arguing, no heroics, and if we find nothing at those coordinates, you pay me anyway. Deal? Deal, Elena said. They left 3 days later. The ship was called the Long Shot, which Davis said was both a joke and a warning. It was small enough to avoid most sensors and fast enough to outrun most pursuit. Rin came aboard with several containers of equipment. Elena brought copies of every file they had gathered. Davis brought weapons which Elena hoped they would not need. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of traveling through increasingly empty space. The trade routes fell away behind them. The communication beacons grew sparse, then vanished entirely. They passed through regions of space that the star charts marked as unexplored. Regions that should have had research stations or colony worlds or at least some sign of galactic presence. But there was nothing. Just empty space and distant stars. This does not make sense, Rin said on the 15th day. This region should have been explored centuries ago. It is close enough to major trade routes, resource-rich enough to be valuable. But there is nothing here. No stations. No markers. No warnings. It is as if everyone decided this entire region was not worth noticing. Or someone decided nobody should notice it, Elena said. On the 21st day, they reached the coordinates. Davis brought the ship out of faster-than-light travel and activated the sensors. The screens filled with data. A star system. 7 planets, one of them in what might have been a habitable zone once. And structures. Artificial structures in orbit around that planet. Structures that were very, very old. I am reading power signatures, Davis said. Faint but present. Something down there is still active after all this time. Elena stared at the screens. After all the research, after all the translations, after all the pyramids and stone circles and desert lines, here was the answer. The place ancient humans had been taught to calculate. The location that had been encoded in monuments across Earth. The coordinates the assembly had marked as forbidden. Take us down, she said. We need to see what they are protecting. The planet looked dead from orbit. Gray continents beneath thin clouds. Oceans that might have been blue once but now held the dull color of lifeless water. No lights on the night side. No transmissions on any frequency. Just silence and the slow rotation of a world that had forgotten how to live. But the sensors showed otherwise. Power readings deep underground. Artificial structures still intact beneath centuries of dust. And something else. Something the sensors could not quite identify. A signal that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Davis guided the Long Shot down through the thin atmosphere. The ship shuddered as it descended and Elena gripped her seat tightly. She had never been comfortable with atmospheric entry. Too many things could go wrong. Too many ways for a ship to tear apart or burn up or simply fall out of the sky like a rock. But Davis's hands were steady on the controls, and the ship settled onto the gray surface with only a slight bump. Atmosphere is breathable, Davis announced, reading the external sensors. Barely, oxygen levels are low. Temperature is cold, but you can walk out there without a suit if you want to risk it. I recommend suits anyway. No telling what kind of microorganisms are floating around. They suited up and stepped out onto the surface. The gravity felt close to Earth normal. The sky was a pale gray-green. In the distance, Elena could see structures rising from the dust. Buildings that might have been tall once. Towers that had partially collapsed. A city built by people who were gone now. Gone for a very long time. According to the sensors, the main power source is that way, Davis said, pointing toward a cluster of structures near what might have been the city center. About 2 kilometers. We can walk it in 20 minutes if the ground stays stable. They walked. Dust rose around their feet with each step. The city surrounded them as they moved deeper, and Elena felt like she was walking through a graveyard. Empty windows stared down at them. Doorways opened onto darkness. Walls were covered in symbols that might have been writing or decoration. She wanted to stop and examine everything, but Davis kept them moving. There would be time for archaeology later. Right now, they needed to find the power source. The central structure was larger than the others. It rose from the ground like a pyramid, but the angles were different. Sharper, more aggressive. The entrance was open, a dark mouth leading underground. Lights flickered somewhere deep inside, activated by their presence or simply cycling through routines they had followed for thousands of years. Stay close, Davis said. They pulled out a weapon that looked like it could punch holes through walls. I do not like places that still have power after sitting empty for millennia. Means someone wanted this place to stay functional. Means there might be defenses. They descended into the structure. The walls were covered in more symbols. These ones glowed softly, providing light as they went deeper. Elena recognized some of the symbols: mathematical notation, star charts, equations that described physics and chemistry and biology. This was not decoration. This was information. This was a library built to last forever, carved into walls that would not erode, powered by systems that would not fail. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling stretched up into darkness beyond their lights. The walls were covered entirely in glowing symbols, and in the center of the chamber stood something that made Elena stop breathing: a holographic interface, ancient beyond measure but still functional. Still waiting, Rin moved forward slowly. Their crystalline form reflected the holographic light, creating rainbow patterns across the floor. This is Accord technology. I have seen fragments of it in museum archives. Stories say the Accord could encode information in light itself, make it last for millions of years without degradation. They reached toward the interface but did not touch it. If this is active, it was meant to be found. The Accord did not leave traps for people seeking knowledge. Then let us see what they left, Elena said. She stepped up to the interface. The holograms shifted at her approach. Symbols rearranged themselves. Languages cycled through the display: Ancient Sumerian, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese oracle script, Mayan glyphs, Greek letters, languages from Earth, thousands of years old, displayed by a system that should not have known they existed. Then the symbols settled. Modern English appeared in the air, simple words that carried enormous weight. Welcome, inheritor. You have proven your heritage. The Accord greets those who understand that calculation is the universal language. Please identify your species for cultural context. Elena's hand shook as she reached for the holographic controls. She selected the option for human. The interface pulsed. The symbols rearranged again. Human. Confirmed. Seed species 773. Knowledge transfer occurred 8,200 years ago by your calendar. You have returned faster than projected. This pleases us. Please proceed to data retrieval. 8,000 years. The Accord had visited Earth 8,000 years ago. Long before the pyramids. Long before written language as the galaxy understood it. They had come to ancient humans and taught them mathematics. They had given humanity the foundation for everything that came after. Why? Elena asked the interface. Why did you choose humans? The hologram shifted. An image appeared. Humanoid figures sitting around a fire. They were drawing in the dirt with sticks. Mathematical symbols, calculations, the image changed. The same figures building structures, measuring angles, computing volumes. Another change. The figures watching the stars, tracking movements, predicting patterns. Text appeared below the images. Humans exhibited unique cognitive properties. Most species developed tools before abstract mathematics. Humans developed abstract mathematical thinking without computational aids. This suggested rare cognitive flexibility. The ability to conceptualize infinity with finite resources. The Accord identifies such species as having high potential for eventual transcendence. Transcendence to what? Rin asked. The hologram showed another image. Beings made of light. Beings that existed outside normal space. Beings that had evolved beyond physical form into pure thought and energy. The Accord began as physical beings like you. We explored the galaxy. We learned. We grew. Eventually, we transcended physical limitation. But we did not forget where we came from. We seeded knowledge throughout the galaxy. We found species with potential and gave them the tools to follow our path. Mathematics is the language of reality. Those who master it can reshape existence itself. Davis moved closer. If you transcended, why leave all this? Why build archives and monuments and hide them from the Galactic Assembly? The Assembly formed after our transcendence. They discovered our archives and made a choice. They feared species that might follow our path. Species that might grow powerful enough to challenge Assembly authority. So they suppressed the evidence. They mistranslated the archives. They restricted access to our worlds. They told themselves it was for stability, for peace. But it was fear. Fear that they might become obsolete. Elena felt anger rising in her chest. 300 years. 300 years of humanity being treated as newcomers, as primitives who needed guidance, as children who should be grateful for being allowed into galactic civilization, all while evidence sat in vaults proving humanity had been ready for the stars since the Bronze Age. Evidence that had been deliberately mistranslated and dismissed. Show us everything, she said. Show us what you gave humanity. Show us what we were supposed to become. The hologram expanded, the chamber filled with light and information. Mathematical models that described physics beyond anything the assembly had discovered. Star charts that showed regions of space the assembly had never explored. Technological blueprints for devices that could manipulate space and time. And history. The history of the Accord, their rise from primitive tool users to transcendent beings, their journey across the galaxy, their decision to seed knowledge and help other species follow the same path. Humans were not the only species they had visited. There were dozens of others. Some had used the knowledge well. Some had lost it. Some had been found by the assembly and had their history rewritten. Humanity was one of many, but humanity had preserved the knowledge better than most. Carved it in stone, built it into monuments, made it part of their cultural identity. The Accord had given humanity a gift 8,000 years ago, and humanity had kept that gift safe even when they did not fully understand what it was. This will change everything, Rin said quietly. If we bring this information back, if we show the galaxy what the assembly has been hiding, it will destabilize everything. Governments will fall. Institutions will collapse. The entire power structure of galactic civilization will be called into question. Good, Elena said. They have been lying for 3 centuries. They told humanity we were primitive. They told us we should be grateful. They patted us on the head and told us to know our place. And all the while they knew. They knew we had been touched by the Accord. They knew we had potential they feared. It is time the galaxy learned the truth. Davis's weapon beeped. They checked the scanner. We have problems. Multiple ships entering the system. Military configurations. They are broadcasting assembly authority codes. Someone knew we were coming here. Or someone has been watching this system for a very long time, Rin said, waiting for anyone to try to reach it. We triggered their alarms when we entered restricted space. Elena turned back to the interface. Can you transmit this information? Can you broadcast it across the galaxy before they stop us? The hologram pulsed. This archive contains fail-safes for this scenario. The Accord anticipated suppression. If you authorize broadcast, this facility will transmit its entire database to every major communication hub in the galaxy. The information will be distributed too widely to suppress. Every scholar, every researcher, every curious mind will receive proof of the Accord and their seed species. The truth will become impossible to hide. How long will the broadcast take? 17 minutes to reach full distribution. Davis checked the scanner again. The ships will be in weapons range in 15 minutes. They are going to try to stop the broadcast. Then we buy 2 minutes, Elena said. She turned to the interface. Authorize broadcast. Send everything. Mathematics, history, star charts, technology. Show the galaxy what the assembly has been hiding. Show them what humanity really is. The hologram flashed bright. Broadcast authorized. Beginning transmission. The truth will reach the stars, Inheritor. The Accord's gift will finally be received. The chamber filled with light as information began streaming upward, through the structure, through the planet's thin atmosphere, into space where it would be picked up by communication satellites and relay stations. From there, it would spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Unstoppable. Inevitable. True. Davis grabbed Elena's arm. We need to move. If we stay here, we are sitting targets. The ship is our only chance. They ran back through the corridors. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter as they passed, as if the facility itself was celebrating. Behind them, deep in the chamber, the broadcast continued. 17 minutes to full distribution. 15 minutes until the assembly ships arrived. 2 minutes that would determine whether the truth survived or died in restricted space. They reached the surface and ran for the long shot. The thin atmosphere made running difficult. Elena's lungs burned. Her legs felt heavy. But she pushed forward because stopping meant failure. Stopping meant the broadcast would be interrupted. Stopping meant the galaxy would never know. They reached the ship. Davis fired up the engines while Rin and Elena strapped in. The long shot lifted off as the first assembly warship entered visual range. It was massive, built for intimidation as much as combat. Its weapons were tracking the long shot, waiting for authorization to fire. A transmission came through. Unidentified vessel, you have violated restricted space. You are ordered to land and surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in the use of force. Davis ignored the transmission and pushed the engines to full power. The long shot climbed fast. The warship followed. More ships appeared on the sensors. They were surrounding the planet, blocking escape routes, making sure nothing left the system. 2 minutes, Elena said, watching the clock. We need 2 more minutes. Working on it, Davis growled. They threw the ship into a hard turn. Weapons fire streaked past. Warning shots. The next ones would not miss. The transmission came again. You are carrying classified information. You are ordered to delete all data and surrender. This is your final warning. Elena looked at the clock. 1 minute 30 seconds. The broadcast was spreading across the galaxy, reaching research stations and universities, flowing into communication networks and data archives. The assembly could stop them, could destroy the ship, but they could not stop the information. Not anymore. 30 seconds, she said. Davis pushed the engines harder. The ship shook. Alarms blared. They were not going to make it. The warships were too close. Too many, too well armed. But they did not need to make it. They just needed to last 30 more seconds. The clock reached 0. The broadcast completed. Full distribution achieved. It is done, Rin said. The galaxy has the truth. The assembly commander's voice came through the transmission one final time. You have just destabilized galactic civilization. I hope you understand what you have done. Elena smiled. I understand perfectly. We reminded the galaxy what humanity really is. The assembly ships did not fire. Elena had expected destruction. She had expected weapons to tear through the Longshot's hull and turn them all into scattered atoms floating in dead space. Instead, the warships held position. Weapons tracking but not firing. Engines primed but not pursuing. They simply watched as the Longshot climbed away from the planet, as if the commanders could not decide what to do, now that the information had already spread. Davis did not question the reprieve. They pushed the ship hard toward the edge of the system, ready to jump to faster than light speed the moment they cleared the gravity well. The silence from the assembly ships felt more threatening than weapons fire. It was the silence of powerful people realizing they had lost control of a situation and did not yet know how to respond. Rin worked frantically at their console. The broadcast reached major communication hubs 17 seconds ago. It is spreading through academic networks now, universities, research stations, public data archives. I am seeing response traffic, thousands of queries, people accessing the information, people verifying it. Their core pulsed rapidly with what might have been excitement or fear. The galaxy is reading it right now. They are seeing the truth about the Accord, about humanity, about everything the assembly hid. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Relief maybe, or perhaps just exhaustion. They had done it. Against all probability, against assembly authority, against 3 centuries of institutional lies. They had revealed the truth. Now the galaxy would have to deal with what that truth meant. The Longshot cleared the gravity well. Davis engaged faster than light drive. The stars stretched and vanished. Behind them, the restricted system disappeared from sensors. But the information they had found there was spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light, jumping from relay station to relay station, flooding into every database that would accept it. Where are we going? Elena asked. Somewhere with good lawyers, Davis said, because the assembly is going to come after us hard once they figure out their next move. We violated restricted space. We stole classified information. We broadcast it without authorization. That is 3 different kinds of illegal, and I am betting they can find 6 more if they try hard enough. Rin looked up from their console. I am monitoring galactic news feeds. The story is breaking everywhere. Major networks are reporting on the broadcast. They are calling it the biggest archaeological discovery in assembly history. Some are calling it a hoax. Others are calling it proof of conspiracy. But everyone is talking about it. Everyone is examining the data. What are they saying about us? Elena asked. You are being called a hero by some, a criminal by others, a human supremacist trying to glorify your species, a brave researcher exposing institutional corruption. The narratives are already forming. People believe what they want to believe, and right now half the galaxy wants to believe the assembly has been lying to them. Elena pulled up the broadcast data on her own screen. The archive had sent everything. Mathematical texts from ancient Babylon showing calculations that matched modern physics. Egyptian engineering documents that proved the pyramids were far more sophisticated than anyone had admitted. star charts from a dozen ancient cultures all pointing to the same coordinates. And the Accord's own records, their history, their purpose, their explanation for why they had chosen humanity as a seed species. The key passage appeared on her screen. She read it again, committing it to memory. Humans exhibited unique cognitive properties. Most species developed tools before abstract mathematics. Humans developed abstract mathematical thinking without computational aids. The Accord identifies such species as having high potential for eventual transcendence. Do you think it is true? She asked Rin. Do you think humanity really has the potential to transcend physical existence? To become like the Accord? Rin's core pulsed slowly. I think the Accord believed it, and I think the Assembly feared it. That fear explains everything. Why they mistranslated your ancient texts, why they restricted access to Accord worlds, why they treated humanity as primitive newcomers despite evidence to the contrary. If humans could transcend, if you could evolve beyond physical limitation, you would become the most powerful species in the galaxy, more powerful than the Assembly itself. That would threaten everything they built. Davis grunted from the pilot's seat. So they kept you down. Made sure you thought you were lucky to be here. Made sure you never looked too closely at your own history. Classic power move. If you can't beat someone, convince them they already lost. The ship's communication system beeped. An incoming message on official Assembly channels. Davis frowned and opened it. Professor Talvin's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than Elena remembered. Tired. His 6 arms hung limply at his sides, and his eyes held something that might have been resignation. Dr. Wright, he said, I assume you are watching this transmission. I am recording it for broadcast across official networks, so you will see it eventually, even if you delete it now. I want you to know that emergency session of the Historical Integrity Committee has been convened. We have examined the data you broadcast. We have verified its authenticity, and we have concluded that our previous assessments of human historical development were incorrect. Substantially incorrect, he paused. One of his arms rubbed at his face in a gesture that looked almost human. You were right. The translation protocols failed. We made assumptions about your species based on insufficient evidence. We dismissed your ancient accomplishments as primitive because we did not understand what we were looking at. This was not malicious. This was incompetence, but the result is the same. We owe humanity an apology. We owe the galaxy an explanation. And we owe you recognition for exposing the truth despite institutional resistance. Another pause, longer this time. However, I must inform you that not everyone on the committee shares this view. Some believe you should be prosecuted for violating restricted space. Some believe the information you released poses a threat to galactic stability. Some believe humanity will use this revelation to demand special status within the Assembly. There will be consequences for what you did, Dr. Wright. I cannot protect you from them, but I want you to know that some of us understand why you did it, and some of us are grateful. The transmission ended. Elena stared at the blank screen. An apology from Professor Talvin. She had not expected that. She had expected denial, cover-up, official statements dismissing the broadcast as fabrication, but instead, at least some of the Assembly was admitting the truth. That felt like progress. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The committee is fracturing, Rin observed. Talvin represents the moderate faction. They want controlled acknowledgement. Admit the mistake, apologize, move forward. But the hardliners will push for suppression. They will argue that admitting this undermines Assembly authority. Makes the government look weak. They will want to make examples of us to discourage others from questioning official narratives. Can they suppress it now? Elena asked. The information is already distributed across the galaxy. They cannot suppress it completely, but they can control the narrative around it. They can discredit us. They can argue the data is misinterpreted. They can claim the Accord was not what we think they were. Given enough time and resources, they can convince people that what seems like proof is actually just coincidence and human wishful thinking. Rin's core dimmed slightly. I have seen it happen before. Truth is not enough if people are determined not to believe it. Davis guided the ship through another jump. They were heading toward the frontier territories. Places where Assembly authority was light and legal jurisdiction was ambiguous. Places where people could disappear if they needed to. Elena hoped it would not come to that. She did not want to spend the rest of her life hiding from Assembly law enforcement. But she would if she had to. The truth was out. That was what mattered. Her screen beeped with another incoming message. This one was not from the assembly. It was from Earth, from the human scientific community. Dozens of researchers were sending her data. They had started examining ancient texts with new translation methods that assumed the symbols were mathematical notation rather than alphabetic writing. And they were finding more than anyone had imagined. Ancient Indian texts described zero as a mathematical concept, not just nothing but a number that could be used in calculations. They described infinity not as a religious idea, but as a mathematical reality. They had calculated irrational numbers like pi and the square root of 2. They had understood that some truths could not be expressed in finite terms, but existed nonetheless. Ancient Greek mathematicians had developed geometric proofs that would not be improved upon for 2,000 years. They had calculated the circumference of Earth using shadows and angles. They had measured the distance to the moon using parallax. They had understood that the universe followed mathematical rules and that those rules could be discovered through observation and logic. Chinese mathematicians had invented methods for solving equations that modern algebra would rediscover centuries later. They had used counting rods to perform calculations in a way that resembled binary computing. They had understood negative numbers, fractional values, and the concept of mathematical proof. Every ancient culture, every civilization that had left written records, all of them had been doing sophisticated mathematics that the galaxy had dismissed as religious symbolism or primitive counting. The Accord had not just taught a few clever tricks. They had taught the foundations of mathematical thinking itself. And humanity had taken those foundations and built cathedrals of thought on top of them. We did more than preserve what they gave us, Elena said quietly. We expanded it. The Accord gave us the tools, but we used those tools to discover things they never taught us. We took their gift and made it our own. Rin examined the data streaming from Earth. Your species has a gift for abstraction, for seeing patterns in complexity, for reducing the universe to mathematical principles and then using those principles to understand reality. The Accord saw that 8,000 years ago. They recognized it as rare, as precious, as something worth preserving even if it took millennia to fully develop. More messages arrived. Other species were examining their own ancient histories, looking for signs that they too had been visited by the Accord. Some were finding evidence, fragmentary records that had been dismissed as mythology, strange artifacts that had never quite fit into standard archaeological models, mathematical concepts that seemed too advanced for the civilizations that had developed them. The Accord had seeded knowledge across the galaxy. Humanity was not special, but humanity had preserved that knowledge better than most, had carved it in stone and built it into monuments that lasted for thousands of years, had made mathematics part of their cultural identity in a way that ensured it would survive, even if everything else was lost. What happens now? Elena asked. The truth is out. The galaxy knows the assembly has been lying. They know humanity is not what they were told. What changes? Everything, Rin said simply. Or nothing. That depends on what people choose to do with this information. Some will demand reform. Some will demand answers. Some will use this as evidence that the assembly cannot be trusted. Others will defend the assembly and argue that maintaining order requires keeping some truths hidden. The galaxy will divide along these lines, and we will be at the center of that division. Davis brought the ship out of faster-than-light travel. They had reached the frontier. A station hung in space ahead of them. Independent. Neutral. The kind of place where people could buy time to think. Time to plan. Time to decide what to do next. We should stay here for a while, Davis said. Let the situation develop. See how the assembly responds. See how the galaxy reacts. Then we decide our next move. Elena nodded. She was tired. More tired than she had ever been. But she also felt something else. Pride, satisfaction, the knowledge that she had done something that mattered. Something that would change the galaxy forever. The symbols ancient humans had carved in clay and stone were no longer meaningless. The galaxy had learned to read them properly. And in doing so, the galaxy had learned what humanity really was. Not primitive, not lucky, not grateful newcomers who should know their place, but inheritors of knowledge from a civilization that had transcended physical existence, bearers of mathematical truth that had survived 8,000 years. A species that had been reaching for the stars since the Bronze Age and had finally, after all this time, been recognized for what they truly were. 3 months had passed since the broadcast, and the galaxy was still arguing about what it meant. Elena sat in a small apartment on the frontier station and watched the news feed scroll across her screen. Every major network carried stories about the Accord revelation. Some called it the greatest archaeological discovery in history. Others called it an elaborate hoax perpetrated by human supremacists. Most fell somewhere in between, acknowledging the data was real but debating what conclusions should be drawn from it. The apartment was cramped but comfortable. Rin had rented it under a false identity, and Davis visited regularly to check on their security. The assembly had not yet issued formal charges, but everyone knew it was coming. You could not violate restricted space and broadcast classified information without consequences. The only question was what form those consequences would take. Her screen chimed with an incoming call. She checked the source. It was from Earth, from the Human Historical Society. She accepted the call and the face of Director Chen appeared. The old woman looked tired but excited. Behind her, Elena could see other researchers working frantically. "Dr. Wright," Chen said without preamble, "we have been analyzing every ancient text we can find using the new translation methods. The results are extraordinary. We are finding mathematics everywhere. Not just in texts we knew were mathematical. We are finding it in poetry, in religious scriptures, in myths and legends. The ancient humans encoded mathematical concepts into every aspect of their culture." "Show me," Elena said. Chen's image split. Half the screen showed her face. The other half displayed a text. Ancient Hebrew scripture. The dimensions given for Solomon's temple. Chen highlighted specific numbers. These measurements are not just practical. They encode pi. They encode the golden ratio. They reference astronomical constants. The entire structure of the temple was a mathematical text disguised as architecture. More images appeared. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The flood story. The dimensions of the Ark. Mathematical relationships hidden in the narrative. The Odyssey. The 10-year journey. The numbers of ships and men. All encoding information about celestial cycles and navigation. The Vedas, the hymns to various gods. Mathematical sequences woven into the poetry itself. "They put mathematics into everything," Chen said. "Every story, every building, every ritual." It was not enough to write it down in scholarly texts that might be lost. They encoded it into culture itself, into religion, into myth. They made sure the knowledge would survive even if the reason for preserving it was forgotten. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 8,000 years ago, the Accord had taught ancient humans mathematical concepts, and those humans had taken that gift and hidden it everywhere. They had made it so fundamental to their civilization that losing it would mean losing everything. Even when the original purpose was forgotten, the mathematics remained, waiting, preserved in stories that parents told children, in buildings that stood for millennia, in rituals that were performed generation after generation without anyone remembering why. "The galaxy is starting to understand," Chen continued. "Other species are examining their own ancient texts with new methods. They are finding similar patterns. The Accord did not just visit Earth. They visited hundreds of worlds, maybe thousands. They seeded mathematical knowledge throughout the galaxy. But humanity preserved it better than anyone. We made it sacred. We made it eternal. We made it part of who we are." The call ended. Elena sat in silence for a moment, thinking about what Chen had shown her. Then her screen chimed again. This time it was an official assembly transmission. She hesitated before accepting. This could be the arrest warrant, the formal charges, the end of her freedom. But when she accepted the call, it was not a judge or prosecutor. It was an invitation. The Assembly Council was holding an emergency session to address the Accord revelation. They wanted her to testify, to explain what she had found, and why she had chosen to broadcast it without authorization. It was not a request. It was a summons. But at least it meant they were taking this seriously. Rin appeared in the doorway. They had been monitoring Assembly communications. "You should go. If you refuse, they will issue a warrant. At least this way you get to tell your side of the story before they decide your fate. Will they be fair?" Elena asked. Rin's core pulsed uncertainly. "Some will. Others will not. But the galaxy is watching. They cannot simply imprison you without justification. Too many people believe you are a hero. Too many people want to hear what you have to say. The Assembly will have to at least pretend to care about truth and justice." Davis helped her arrange transport, a neutral ship willing to guarantee her safety to the council chambers and back. The assembly agreed to the terms, though Elena suspected they were not happy about it. She traveled under escort, watching the galaxy pass by through the ship's windows. So many worlds, so many species, all of them connected by the assembly into something that resembled civilization. But what was civilization built on? Truth or lies? Justice or control? The council chambers were enormous, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species. The architecture was meant to intimidate, to make individuals feel small and insignificant compared to the vast machinery of galactic government. Elena walked to the center of the chamber and stood in a circle of light. Around her, in rising tiers, sat the council members. Some looked curious. Some looked hostile. Most looked like they wanted this whole situation to go away. The speaker called the session to order. Their voice echoed through the chamber. Dr. Elena Wright, you stand before this council to answer for your actions. You violated restricted space. You accessed classified information. You broadcast that information without authorization. These are serious charges. However, before we discuss consequences, we must first understand what you found and why you believed it was necessary to share it with the galaxy. Speak freely. This council will hear your testimony. Elena took a breath. This was it. This was her chance to explain everything, to make the galaxy understand why she had done what she did. She began with the vault at the Scalarium, the ancient human artifacts that had been dismissed as meaningless, the translation errors that had persisted for 3 centuries, the systematic mistranslation of human mathematical texts as religious symbolism. The galaxy told humanity we were primitive, she said. You told us we were lucky to be found, lucky to be lifted up from our backward world and shown the wonders of civilization. But the evidence shows something different. It shows that humanity was never primitive. We were doing advanced mathematics when most species were still developing basic tools. We were calculating planetary movements. We were understanding infinity. We were reaching for the stars with nothing but our minds and our mathematics. A council member interrupted, a large being with tentacles and too many eyes. These claims are extraordinary. Why should we believe that ancient humans, without computers or advanced instruments, could perform calculations that rival modern science? Because the numbers do not lie, Elena said. Mathematics is not opinion. It is not culture. It is truth. When ancient Babylonians calculated pi to 5 decimal places, that was not luck. That was understanding. When ancient Chinese developed methods for solving complex equations, that was not accident. That was intelligence. The evidence is there. It has always been there. You simply chose not to look at it properly. Another council member spoke. This one was more sympathetic. But why hide this information? Why restrict access to Accord worlds? Because you were afraid, Elena said. She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes with as many council members as she could. The Accord identified humanity as a species with potential for transcendence. They taught us mathematics because they believed we could follow their path. They believed we could evolve beyond physical limitation and become something greater. That terrified the assembly. If humanity transcended, we would be more powerful than any government, more powerful than any military. We would be beyond your control, so you hid the evidence. You mistranslated our texts. You dismissed our accomplishments. You kept us ignorant of our own potential. The chamber erupted in noise. Some council members shouted denials. Others demanded order. The speaker called for silence repeatedly before the chaos subsided. When it finally did, they looked at Elena with an expression she could not read. These are serious accusations, the speaker said. You are claiming that the assembly has engaged in a conspiracy lasting 3 centuries. You are claiming we deliberately suppressed information about human potential. You are claiming we acted out of fear rather than reason. Do you have proof of these claims? I have the Accord's own words, Elena said. Their archives explain why they chose humanity. They explain what they believed we could become, and I have 3 centuries of mistranslations. 3 centuries of human artifacts being labeled as primitive when they were sophisticated. 3 centuries of evidence being dismissed without proper examination. If that is not proof of deliberate suppression, then it is proof of institutional incompetence so profound that this council should be dissolved and reformed. More shouting, more chaos, but beneath it Elena could hear something else. Conversations, debates, council members talking to each other instead of shouting at her. Some were angry, but some were considering her words. Some were questioning their own assumptions. That was all she needed. Not agreement. Just doubt. Just enough uncertainty to crack the foundation of 3 centuries of lies. The session continued for hours. Other witnesses testified. Rin explained the translation errors in technical detail. Chen showed examples of mathematical encoding in ancient human culture. Experts from other species presented their own findings. Evidence that the Accord had visited their worlds too. Evidence that the Assembly's official history was incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Finally, after exhausting everyone present, the speaker called for a vote. Not on Elena's guilt or innocence. That would come later, but on whether the Assembly would acknowledge the truth of the Accord's existence and their relationship with humanity. Whether they would admit that ancient humans were more sophisticated than official history claimed. The vote was not unanimous. Many council members voted against acknowledgement, but enough voted in favor. Barely enough. The motion passed by the narrowest margin. The Assembly would officially recognize that ancient humans had possessed advanced mathematical knowledge. They would officially acknowledge that the Accord had visited Earth. They would officially admit that the translation protocols had failed to properly analyze human historical texts. It was not everything Elena had hoped for. It was not a full apology. It was not an admission of conspiracy, but it was acknowledgement. It was the Assembly admitting they had been wrong. That was a crack in the foundation. That was the beginning of change. The speaker addressed her directly. Dr. Wright, the charges against you for violating restricted space remain under consideration. However, in light of what you have revealed, this council acknowledges that your actions, while illegal, served a greater purpose. You exposed truth that had been hidden for too long. You challenged assumptions that should have been questioned centuries ago. For that, we recognize your contribution to galactic knowledge, even as we must consider the legal consequences of how that contribution was obtained. It was a politician's answer, neither absolution nor condemnation, just enough to satisfy both sides while committing to nothing. But Elena would take it. She had not come here to be forgiven. She had come here to be heard. She left the chambers and returned to the frontier station. Rin and Davis were waiting. They looked relieved to see her free. How did it go? Davis asked. They acknowledged the truth, Elena said. Not all of it. Not the conspiracy. But they admitted ancient humans were sophisticated. They admitted the translations were wrong. It is not enough, but it is a start. News of the Council's decision spread quickly. The galaxy received it with mixed reactions. Some celebrated, some protested, but everyone talked about it. Everyone debated what it meant. And while they debated, researchers across the galaxy kept working. They examined ancient texts with new eyes. They found more evidence of the Accord. They discovered more about humanity's mathematical heritage. A year passed, then 2. The Assembly's investigation into the Accord became the largest archaeological project in galactic history. Dozens of restricted worlds were opened for study. Hundreds of researchers from every species worked to understand what the Accord had been and why they had disappeared. And at the center of it all was humanity, not because they were special, but because they had preserved the Accord's gift better than anyone. Elena returned to the Scholarium. Professor Talvin had resigned, replaced by a new director who wanted to correct past mistakes. The vault where human artifacts had been stored was converted into a center for